Charlton, shall we? What I've been doing and my overall views, and then we could have a general chat and you could tell me some of your experiences, which obviously go back in some instances, if not all, a lot further than mine. Perhaps I should say first of all that I come from Nottingham originally, from a strong football supporting family. My father and my brother, and now my husband and my son, all support Nottingham Forest, although my grandfather and his generation tended to be Notts County supporters, because Notts County is a very old established team in Nottingham, and the older generation have a bit of an affiliation there in spite of the more exciting times that Forest have had over recent years. And my husband is one of the many husbands who still travels extensively around the country and occasionally goes abroad when English teams could go abroad following his team. So I have been involved in footballing families for many years. One of the major occasions in my life when I went to a football match was actually on my 10th wedding anniversary. Our two children, our two oldest children, were very small at the time, and my husband said to me, get a babysitter for the whole day in the evening. We're going out and we're having a wonderful day. So I was thinking, I didn't know where I was going, and I thought perhaps I'm going to Paris for the day, or perhaps it's a show in town followed by a meal. And I was very surprised, I might tell you, to find myself at a football ground in the afternoon with a hot dog, which was obviously my husband's idea of a wonderful 10th wedding anniversary. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't quite what I'd anticipated. Now, obviously, Charlton's connection with this borough goes back decades, and it has a very deep-rooted tradition here. But when it moved away after the financial difficulties it had experienced, there was a feeling in Charlton, perhaps, that a first division football team on your doorstep was less than desirable. The reason I got onto this overview was that every week in my postbag at the House of Commons I would get letters from people saying, oh, you must support Charlton coming back to the Valley. And when I went to write back to them, I noticed that the vast majority of them were from places like Dartford and Sidcup and Gravesend. People who maybe lived in Charlton years ago but had moved out over the decades. And obviously felt a strong attachment to Charlton being in its original ground, but didn't live near enough to reap the consequences of a football crowd on your doorstep. And many of the letters I got from the residents of Charlton were saying it's been very peaceful since Charlton had moved away, we haven't had any vandalism, the parking's been a lot better, let's have Charlton back. And so I felt it wasn't a political question, but it certainly was a matter of general interest to people living in a particular area as to whether they wanted a top football team in their midst or not, and particularly as Charlton is a fairly densely packed residential area. And I felt that my job as a Member of Parliament was simply to represent the views of people in my constituency who were going to be affected, including both the football supporters and the residents, and of course many are both. Many are football supporters and residents. So I decided I would conduct a fairly extensive survey in the vicinity of Charlton Athletics ground. I started on the roads immediately outside and worked my way out. And what I did was I drew up a fairly simple, straightforward questionnaire, which I think was quite neutral. And I'll read it. You saw it?
I didn't think it was.
Didn't you?
No.
Well, we'll come on to that in a moment. I've got a copy here if anybody hasn't seen it and would like to. Well, I am a market researcher by trade, and so...
She knows it alone.
I do know how to load them. I'm sure I've got I'm sure I've got one.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Where is it? Ah, here we are. Anyway, I've bought one. I'll pass it round and you can all have a quick look at it, and then we can discuss it in a moment when you've all had a chance to have a look at it. Anyway, I distributed the questionnaire through the letterbox with a date, usually a Saturday, but mostly a Sunday morning, when I would be calling round to collect them. And I think I distributed over 3,000. and collected over 1,000 back again, which is quite a sizable sample by anybody's definition, and for one particular area where there's a sort of concentrated residential block, all with views, strongly or not, about this particular issue. I think it gave me a fair view. Now, basically, the questionnaire asks what people think about Charlton coming back to the Valley. Do they approve, disapprove, or do they have mixed feelings? And why they have those feelings. And when you've all had a chance to look at the questionnaire, we'll come back to that. But it was interesting that the response to date has been very, very finely balanced indeed. 42% have been against, 39% in favour, and the rest have had mixed feelings. So as you can see, very little difference, and actually being strictly correct from a market research point of view, that difference between 42 and 39% wouldn't be statistically significant. You could put that down to a margin of error. So what you can certainly see from that, and is that opinions are very mixed indeed. And those who didn't have strong views, the 20% or so who didn't have strong views, it was often because they could see both sides of the argument. It didn't mean that they didn't feel quite strongly, but they could sympathise with both sides. Now, the reasons that people felt that Charlton should come back to the Valley, they were often Charlton fans, they liked football, they wanted football in their area. They felt that Charlton had its natural home at the Valley, that's where it belonged. And there was a feeling that something of the life of the community had gone out of the area with the loss of the football team. There was a feeling that there was very little for the young people in Charlton to get involved in and to focus on, and that having the football team back in the Valley would do a lot for the neighbourhood and would help to revitalise and rekindle some of the community spirit which it was felt had died. On the other side of the coin, those who were against, by far the largest concern was parking. 38% of those who were against Charlton coming back said that parking was the biggest issue, compared with 21% who were worried about hooliganism. So you can see that parking was a worry to nearly twice as many people as hooliganism. That doesn't mean to say that the same people that were worried about parking may not also have been worried about hooliganism. But although there was fear of football crowds and violence and vandalism, the fact that you couldn't park your car on a Saturday, that if you happened to want to go out on a Saturday afternoon and didn't get out in time, you would be trapped in because the roads would be blocked, that if you went to do your shopping on a Saturday, you couldn't come back until way after the football had finished. Those were the sort of considerations. And then there were the particular concerns, things like access for ambulances and fire engines, which were mentioned by a few people. Well, you shake your head, but there was one fire in Harvey Gardens where the ambulance, but where the fire engine couldn't get through, and it was a fairly minor fire in the early stages, but turned into quite a serious one. So I do think local people have a right to be concerned about access of emergency vehicles. But
is that a recent time? That fire?
It was in the time, obviously, when Charlton was still playing at home, but I can't remember how recent it was. I could check that out, but
I think you'll find that if that was fairly recent, that the crowd that was going down at the time was something like in the region of about 10,000. A week go back when there's 75,000.
Yeah.
There was never any bother then.
Right.
75,000 are a lot more people, and this, you know.
Well, I would agree with that. I think one of the differences is that people living in the area mentioned, and many who'd lived there for years mentioned, they said that years ago you did get tens of thousands, but the vast majority came on foot or on bicycle.
That is true.
And the change over the years is that many more fans come in cars.
And that happens everywhere, doesn't it?
But you see, what I don't want you to do is to take the view that immediately that you've got to be defensive, that I'm going to take the view that Charlton shouldn't come back. I think there's a solution to that problem. You simply have residents parking only in the area. You arrange car parking down by the river or in other places. And I think the important thing is to know what people's concerns are, and instead of railroading over them and saying it isn't a problem, saying, well, if you're concerned about that, there's something we can do about it. My view in all this is that because there's such a mixed view, and if Charlton can get its planning permission for the developments that are needing to be allowed to raise the money to refurbish the ground, then it should come back, providing the safety regulations and the right conditions are laid down. And I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to say, in what actually are fairly narrow roads, you can draw a ring round and say, well, visitors mustn't bring their cars within these parameters. If you look at Floyd Road, Lansdowne Lane, all those roads, they're fairly narrow, and it makes sense to actually say, well, keep the cars down by the parks on the river. There's a lot of space down there, and people can walk through quite comfortably. But anyway, we'll come back to the discussion. I'll just give you the rest of the...
We've got plenty of questions, so...
Right, I'll give you the rest of the sort of... the survey. So the parking and the traffic was the biggest single objection. The next one was hooliganism. And people did say, and it depended very much which road you went down, that there had been instances, and it was nearly always, if not always, attributed to visiting fans, not Charlton fans. Charlton fans were thought to have a very good reputation indeed. But it was the occasional visiting crowd where they'd lost and turned nasty. And they'd walked up a road and they'd pulled off everybody's radio aerial or wing mirror, or pulled the plants up out of the garden, used the front garden as a toilet, broken odd windows. And you could go up one road where a crowd had gone up and behaved like this, and it had stuck in everybody's minds. And the next road you could go down, they hadn't had a similar experience, and they say, well, we haven't really had any trouble here. But I think they weren't so much worried about major incidents of violence or outbreaks of knife attacks, gangs fighting gangs. It was what I, in fact, described to one of them as the petty hooliganism and the petty vandalism, and I nearly got my head bitten off for using the word petty, because they said it isn't petty if you get your wing mirror snapped off, or someone uses your front garden as a toilet, or you've just put your roses in and you've saved up for them and they're all pulled up, or what have you. People did feel very strongly about that. Noise and the general hullabaloo was occasionally raised as a problem, and it was also raised as a problem in relation to the pop concerts that the ground was used for once in a while. There was some concern that the ground might be used more extensively, and I think many people would be very happy to put up with it, knowing it was once a fortnight, even if they thought it was inconvenient. But if they thought to make the ground pay, it was going to be used extensively for pop concerts every night in the summer, for example, they would have reservations about that. There were some who thought that there was better use for the area. But parking, hooliganism, traffic, general nuisance, vandalism, litter, these were the sort of issues which were raised time and time again as the cause of objection. Now, those who had mixed feelings could see both sides of the coin. They felt that something had gone out of the area, that the spark had gone out as a result of Charlton moving away, but nevertheless they felt that life had been more peaceful since. And there were a lot of people in the area who said that football crowds have changed. Going back to the point you made, that you could have a crowd 10 times as large as the one they might get now, and there'd be 2 policemen and everybody would arrive peacefully, leave peacefully, everybody would have a good time, and there'd be no trouble, no fear, no apprehension. There was a feeling that those days had gone, and that you didn't know what to expect with a football crowd, and it was always emphasised that it wasn't the Charlton fans, but if you were going to get Arsenal fans or Millwall fans or Liverpool fans, you just didn't know how they were going to behave, and it was a little bit like sitting on top of a volcano on that particular Saturday afternoon. So that was the overall feeling, and as a result of this, what I've done is I've written to Sandra Hunt, the Borough Planning Officer, to ask if I can have a meeting with her before the final decision is made, and I will give her a fully written up version of my findings, just to make it clear how strongly people do feel in both directions, and that due consideration is given to what I think are the understandable anxieties of local residents. There are people, for example, who've bought homes in the immediate vicinity on the understanding that there wasn't going to be a football team in their on their backyard. Well, that's right. That's right. Well, I agree with you that is their fault. There are many council tenants there who say if you want to do a mutual exchange, it's very difficult to do a mutual exchange if you live on top of the valley ground. People don't want to. On the other hand, there may be other people who would like to live right on top of the valley ground. There are certainly people in some of the accommodation, in particularly the tower block on Lansdowne Lane, where they get a wonderful view and enjoy the football and would regard it as a perk to live there. And so it's not all negative, but there are those sort of anxieties. But I think that it would be fair to say that football crowds are not the same now as they were 20 or 30 years ago, and that there is, as with so many of these things, a tendency for the vast majority of perfectly law-abiding, sensible, fair-minded people having their enjoyment of football put at risk by the bad behaviour of a small minority, and I think that's undoubtedly the case. I mean, there are football crowds week in and week out where there is no trouble. Certain teams have a reputation of never attracting trouble with their particular supporters. It is the small minority, the hardcore, that many of you may argue have muscled in on football and are not really true football supporters, who are giving it a bad reputation. But perhaps I can stop there, and you can. Most of you have had an opportunity to look at the question.
So all those things that you brought up there apply equally to most football grounds in the country.
Yep.
Are you suggesting then that all professional football should be abolished?
Oh no, not at all.
Those things apply to
They
most
do.
grounds.
They do.
Football applies to shopping precincts, all these big Sunday hypermarkets. Are these people at Charlton who's complaining about parking? Well, don't they complain when they want to park their car outside my house or somebody else's house? Has that been put to them? Like the person that doesn't want to run up their street, but they want to be able to use the side streets for themselves. These are the sort of people like this minority in football. Should we be changing the rules for the minority? You know, should we be saying, let's change it all because, you know, someone doesn't want to use fur or someone doesn't want to parking? I mean, there's two sides to the story, isn't there?
Yes.
I live at the back of a hospital where there's parking outside of my house all day long.
Exactly.
And a lot more houses in the whole street, not just for 2 hours on a Saturday, which I don't know, doesn't make hardly any difference. They're there all day.
Well, the parking really is something that just shouldn't even need to be considered, because they should make provision for it elsewhere.
The 40-odd% that was against Charlton coming there.
Yeah.
When was that taken?
This has
says
been
there Saturday.
Yeah,
This has been done. Well, that was just particularly one.
Yeah,
That,
but
the
what
vast
Saturday was
majority of it was done on Sunday mornings over a 6-month period.
I was saying, what Saturday? He did say Saturday.
There was one. We did one Saturday.
Yeah, what Saturday was
When was
that?
that?
I can't remember which
Was
particular
there
Saturday.
Charlton playing away, or Tennis Park?
Yes,
Or were they playing?
there was one Saturday we did, and I can't. I can probably check from my diary, but I can't remember which day it was.
This is important.
But I think there may have been one Saturday we did when Charlton were playing.
In that case, it would be biased.
Well, certainly, yes. But you see, what happened was, as with all of those, I put them through the doors on the Friday and said I would be calling on the Saturday. Nearly always I called. They were nearly all done on the Sunday, but there was an opportunity for them to send them back, and we did get quite a lot through the post.
Supporters in on that Saturday.
Well, I think his point's fair. I think your points are fair.
Between 39 and 40 something would have been reversed.
Yeah. I think your point is a fair one. The vast majority, it took me about 6 months to do it,
Oh, yeah.
but the vast majority
You
was
didn't see
done...
me, I live in Charlton.
Right. Which road do you live on?
I live in Rectory-Field Crescent,
Oh, no, I don't
which is
know.
very near there.
Yes.
I live near Kidbrooke.
And you do too?
I live in Victoria Way.
Yeah. Which is very near.
You came around and collected my questionnaire.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I did receive one,
No,
so...
in
I
any
haven't
case-
done Rectory Free at present.
Could you make a point, Rosie, that we're only talking about 20 odd days out of 365 anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a
And another point, surely, which
It's not
must come
every
up,
week.
is the police have got the power to control the parking by putting down the cones.
Which they
Until
do.
they put down no parking cones.
Well, I scattered for 25 years after I packed up train station, and I never saw one incident of trouble. And that's going back to 1956, right up until about 5 years ago.
Charlie played for Charlton from just before the war.
And
until
in that course of
after
that
the war.
time, I never saw any trouble. And when you read of trouble, it's more or less you can work it out for yourself. It's the same trouble more or less at the same time, and it's only it goes down to a possible about a dozen of these clubs altogether.
outside the tube.
And I never saw any trouble.
Well, the only
and I used to say, well, you know, well, I've been today, I've been watching the match on a Saturday, I might probably in the midweek match, and I never saw anything. And yet it's all, the only trouble we see today are the same, I won't name the clubs, but they're almost the same type of people. In all those, get rid of those, and life will be wonderful again.
Well,
I mean, I've played for 12 years at Charlton, and when there's 60, 70,000 people, and you
No
can go
trouble.
down there and walk away, and
I went to one of the meetings where a policeman actually, well, an elderly gentleman stood up and said that he was a retired policeman and he'd been on duty at the Valley some years ago, many years ago, where there was a crowd of 70, 80,000 and there were only 2 policemen on duty and that's all that was necessary.
One on each corner.
Yeah.
We all know all these problems that we've mentioned in relation to Charlton are, of course, the social side of life today.
The only real trouble I've ever seen in Charlton was on an Easter Monday when they beat Chelsea 4-1, when the Chelsea fans just went berserk.
That's probably when they went down the road ripping off the windows and the...
That's probably the one time that will stick in the mind.
People remember that,
Oh,
you see.
they remember that. They wouldn't remember the other 10 times or 20 times and nothing happened at all.
Well, I only remember when the bomb hit the house. I don't remember when the times he missed.
But it's true.
you never walked out of Charlton Ground, you got
And
carried
it's-
out by the crowd.
And it's the same. Emphasise it's only once in a fortnight.
Right.
And once in a fortnight where you get every day outside, say, Safeway supermarket for parking, you know, or any other supermarket, or any other venue, if it's a railway stations, anywhere. The parking there is try and park up in any part of Lewisham. It's impossible.
Well, I
And
read
don't put all the crowd there.
I read an article many years ago by a psychologist who said that this business of hooliganism and fighting and everything else happens in all countries where there hasn't been a war within 25 years of the last one. And it is because there is no common enemy that they had during the war that they just
That is
take it out on everyone
true.
else. And
This
it's
is something
a
I'd
very,
like-
very good article.
I think the main problem with these tenants local is the parking, and I think there is we've got to say to them, well, you've got to park your car. I think it's got to be put.
Well, the parking can be solved without very little problem at all. I mean, I don't really think that's a bone of
I think
contention
this is
at all,
the-
because
this is
there
the
is
main
plenty of room
option.
down by the river, below the lower road, and the
Well,
industrial
that's
estates
my
down there.
view.
Stones, or there's the Westminster Industrial Estate, the Dockyard Industrial Estate. There's plenty of space down there, which would not take. I mean, a lot of those areas are not used on a Saturday or in the evening if there's an evening match, and so it would be possible to arrange for parking to be there. And really, I don't think that the arguments whether Charlton or not should not be centred around parking,
Well,
because
that was the point I was making
Well, I'll tell
earlier.
you
That
what's one thing.
I think that's one problem that
I
you
go
can
to
solve
Charlton
easily.
regularly, never miss it, unless Christmas Day or something. However, I used to go down to Charlton, when they were at the Valley, that's not only a couple of years ago. I used to park every time. I used to park, and I used to go down there 5 to 3, no problem. So where the parking problems come in, I don't know. I used to park, always park in a place, never illegally. Just park, you know. I don't think we'll trouble.
Well, people were absolutely passionate about the parking. They felt imprisoned in their own homes. The fact that they couldn't get out if they were in a block and the access was blocked off and they couldn't drive out, or they came back with their shopping and they couldn't get in, and they would feel very strongly about that indeed. And they would be saying that in the last minute before the match, in desperation, people would abandon their cars almost anywhere. And certainly on Charlton Church Lane, several people told me that the police had asked them as residents to move their cars to make room for the football fans' cars. And in fact, one of them had had a row with the police because he'd actually been for a drink. Well, several people told me that.
You'd always get people who will oppose anything.
Well, I'll tell you what. Can we have one person talking at a time to make the best use of the time we have available? And also, I mean, I think parking, is a peripheral problem. It's something that can be solved with consultation between the club, the police, the local residents. And I think our time is much better spent actually looking at the specifics.
Could I say what I think about parking? And I think I agree that this is one of the most soluble problems. What needs to happen is that the council and the police and the local residents need to come to an agreement on parking which they all decide they'll make stick, which is simply that you put the cars elsewhere, you keep the roads open, you keep people with access to their own homes, and that's the end of that. And I think my own view is if that arrangement was arrived at and made to stick, the vast majority of the opposition would evaporate. I think that is something that can be done. I think much more difficult, and you'll tell me what you think about this, is the reputation that football crowds have got.
Could I ask you something now? I mean, have you consulted with the police, local police of the Valley, on various incidents or overall views over the past few years, and have you consulted with the police in Croydon on the reputation of Charlton supporters at Selhurst Park?
I haven't consulted with the police in Croydon. I've been.
Do you feel that you should? Because it's very.
Well, I probably should, and I will. I'll do that. I've consulted with the local police, particularly at the public meeting where they sent their representatives and made it clear what they felt they could and couldn't do. And I should say, I did feel at the public meeting that I wasn't getting the commitment from the police, the authority and Charlton Athletics management that they were going to tackle the problem. I think one of the difficulties is if you've got three bodies involved, there's a tendency to say, well, that's not my job, it's his job. And there was a bit of buck passing, and I felt that the residents were getting the feeling that nothing was going to be done because everyone was going to say that's somebody else's job, which is why I would like the residents, the police, the local authority and the football management themselves to sit down and come up with a package which they all agree they'll make work. Because, for example, one resident said to the management of Charlton, well, what will happen then if after a match I get my wing mirrors pulled off, as has happened to me once before, will you compensate me? And he said, no, of course I can't do that, it's outside the ground, it's not our responsibility, and that's a criminal matter. And so then it's, well, what will the police do? Well, the police can't do anything unless they catch the guy, and so it's over to you and your insurance and losing your no claims bonus. Now, I felt that obviously it's not sensible to say to Charlton that you've got to foot the bill for everything that happens in this vicinity, but there's got to be a cooperative effort.
Well, do nightclubs foot the bill for cars that get damaged outside them when they close at 2 o'clock in the morning and people are drunk and they come out and they go on the rampage?
Of course they don't.
Of course they don't.
But if you live on top of a football ground, and this is a worry that you have, this is one of the reasons why you might say, no, I don't want them back again. And there's nothing that these people can do to stop them coming back again. Charlton can come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
They have planning permission, but where the difficulty is for them is that they need the planning permission for the development that they need to do. And that, apart from anything else, that does detract from the amount of car parking, because one of the bits of land that they want to use is what was their car park. Now, that's what they need. Sorry, do you want to come back at me on that?
No, it's okay.
We get that trouble every Saturday night, what you're talking about, in Willall Road. And if we've got the Odeon up, and that's 1 o'clock in the morning they finish, and the chaps come down here and they leave mirrors.
My understanding is
football
is a symptom of our society.
Just for the sake of taking precautions, about 20 days in a year, couldn't they take the windows off and take them indoors?
Yeah, a bit of a job.
No.
That's unreasonable, I think.
No.
I'm not a car.
No.
If I could say,
It's not an issue.
So one person talking to make the best. We've only got 45 minutes, so if we have one person talking at one time, it would make it a lot more orderly. Please, order.
Could I ask you something? In the early days after Charlton had gone to Selhurst Park and there was some discussion about it coming back, there was talk that it would go down on the Blackwall Peninsula, which now everyone's trying to make money out of it. They're calling it the Greenwich Peninsula.
Yeah. British Gas stopped that, didn't they?
You asked me in the early days, well, the football authorities now think that the council had more to do with stopping it than they were told in the early days.
We were told that that was contaminated land.
Well, they're going to build houses
It's a
on
different
it.
issue.
But you asked me at the beginning, did I think all football should be banned? And I certainly don't. I think football is a part of our national heritage and should be protected. And I don't believe that we should succumb to a vicious minority and spoil the majority's enjoyment. I think that would be quite wrong. But I do feel that with the change in football crowds and with the change in the number of people who have cars, we've got to look at the siting of some of our grounds, which are very often in densely populated inner city areas with narrow streets. And as we saw in Hillsborough, it wasn't the ground that was the problem, it was the surrounding areas which didn't lend themselves to the arrival of such large crowds.
Take issue with that, I think.
Well, you might
take issue with
but
that.
I think it's fair to say it's not just what happens inside the ground, it's what happens outside the ground as well.
Yeah.
And I thought that actually, and in fact the Charlton management were keen on having a brand new purpose-built stadium in circumstances where they could not only have the best facilities within the grounds, they could have the approach roads much better organised and plenty of room for car parking and no problem to immediate sort of residents.
Yeah.
And I'd just be interested in your views on that.
You just said the word heritage. That's why we want to go back to the restaurant.
And it's not a congested place, as like Tottenham and Arsenal. They are absolutely cramped.
And they're crowds of 3 or 4
Charlton
times
is
the size
not.
of Charlton's.
It's not a congested place, Charlton. It's vast. It's easily accessible, and it can be improved even. Very little to
Well,
done to be improved.
let's address the question
Yeah.
whether purpose-built stadiums and specific siting, whether that would be preferable to going back to the valley. Well, when Charlton left the valley, one of the things that was put forward by the board of directors at the time was, well, if you support the club, you do not support the ground. So therefore, the future of football was in ground sharing. It hasn't worked. It's been proved not to work. Because people tie the two in together. Charlton is the valley, and there's no ifs or buts about it.
And also, it was an awkward journey, wasn't it?
Journey.
The journey.
Yeah.
But even if they'd gone to Millwall, it would have been the same kind of thing. You would have got people not going to Millwall because it's not the valley.
Yeah. There's a ground that is dangerous, Cold-Blow Lane. Oh, there's one road in and a little entrance at the other end. Yeah, but you don't.
And there is no trouble
you
from
do the
their
same with Charlton as you do at Millwall. You don't,
you
you
know
don't
that, don't
actually
you?
park cars in Cold-Blow Lanes, do you?
They're
So
helping
it's not a
them.
problem.
Council helping Millwall.
Well, we're not talking.
Yes,
Let's keep it
Stick to
focused.
Greenwich.
Let's stick to Greenwich. Keep it focused on the argument in hand.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Charlton supporters would have felt if there had have been no option whatsoever of returning to the valley, then second choice would have been a ground locally,
Yeah.
which would brought the club back to its natural
area.
environment,
Greenwich Borough.
into the Greenwich Borough.
Right.
However, with the option of the valley, which Charlton supporters refused to accept, was ever to be a non-option. The valley was an option, and it was there. The evidence was there, being left derelict for 4 years. That was where they felt they should have gone.
Right.
And
Well,
you'd have a
that's
hard
something.
task convincing Charlton supporters that they could go down to the Blackwall Peninsula if they thought there was an opportunity of going back to the
I
valley.
think that's gone by the board. It
Yes,
isn't going to be
it's
the
finished.
case. So we've got
Yeah.
to now base the facts on, as it exists. What objections have people have got Charlton going back to the valley? I mean, there shouldn't be a problem with the parking if you speak to the police, because I drive down to Brighton quite often where my son lives. Now, he pays the money for a residential car parking bay. He can't even park on it. If I park on it, I get nicked. Now, why couldn't they put residential parking bays only? The residents would be so pleased if they've got a residential parking bay. that sort of thing could be put on the actual 5 to 6 streets around the borough, shouldn't it? So if they do park on a Saturday afternoon, the police put a ticket on their car and then leaves. The residents can park there because they've got permission. You know, there's ways.
Displayed on the
I agree that sort of solution to the parking is the right one, and that would, I hope, get most of the objectors.
You get them on our side. Well, I won't say get them on our side, but it would put a point of view to them to say, well, look, you've got an objection.
I think it would certainly mollify them considerably.
Yeah.
You see, I feel as Member of Parliament representing Charlton, I represent both those people who are passionate football supporters and those who live in the area who may be football supporters or not, but who don't happen to want it right there. And it's my job to get the best solution, and in this case, what will be the best compromise.
If you feel you obviously it's very important to represent the feeling amongst your constituents. Now, so far, really, you've been talking about the people who live in the direct vicinity of the ground. Right. Now, your constituency spreads a lot further than that. Right. And if you were to come back canvass the rest of your constituents, do you not feel there would be an overwhelming feeling of support to Charlton returning to the Valley? And would you then not be...
Well, everybody who doesn't live in Charlton, they can all write to me about it. Everybody knows that I've been taking a keen interest. And as I said to you earlier, one of the things that made me think I've actually got to get out and talk to people was that all the letters I was getting seemed to be from people who didn't live anywhere near at all. I have had some from the constituency, of course, but I seem to be getting droves from people who live miles away.
Well, I think it's due to a little man who thought he'd knock a few houses down between 1939 and 45. That's why a lot have moved, and others have got out for the simple reason they've bettered themselves.
There has been a general movement in that direction.
But they're not all the supporters are not all confined in the few seats around the valley.
No. Of course not.
They wouldn't count for
50 years ago, Jim was coming from St Mary Cray to go to the Valley.
Cycle from St Mary Cray, 1938.
So, I mean, traditionally, Charlton support has, it was centred on Charlton. The support there has been a tendency to drift further eastwards.
In fairness,
but they are the only main football team serving the whole of, North Kent and South East London, apart from Millwall. They're far more localised. And it's very important that to realise that constituency is an artificial boundary drawn up, and it's not just the interest of people within the constituency that will be affected. People living outside.
Well, I accept that. But my specific job is to represent the constituents.
How about your neighbour, John Cartwright?
Well, he's always been a supporter of Charlton, as you know. Yes. And but you see, his people in his constituency who are Charlton supporters have all the benefits with none of the disadvantages. People who live down where I live in West Greenwich, any other part, if they're a Charlton supporter, they have all the benefit without the disadvantages. And so I do think it's the people who live in the immediate vicinity.
No, it's not true. They're travelling through the area, they're going to get snarled up in the traffic. They want to get a bus, there's going to be queues. Maybe the buses will be full. So
well, I'll maybe extend the survey to the whole of Greenwich then and see what comes out.
These people that live in the Charlton football ground go down to Greenwich Market and down by the Cutty Cycle Park their cars, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've got to face the facts and base it on the fact that they're obviously going to complain, and we feel they've got a right to complain. So I think we've got to be able to say, but you do it, and don't you realise, I think we've got to win their ways over to think that people's got to park cars, they've got to have some. This is what I think we've got basically.
The Cuddy Cycle in particular, that area, the market, what can they put it down to, the resident fare? They wouldn't put it down to Charlton, would they? They put it down to what? They can't say tourism. Tourism.
Everywhere.
Stop there.
Everywhere there's entertainment, there's going to be people living there.
It shouldn't be a point.
It's a logical thing that we've got to put to them and say, well,
But you see, I think you're on the wrong tack here, because I think you can sort that out.
Yes.
I think I don't think the line should be to say to people, you hate this parking, it's making you stop, not want Charlton come back, but you've got to put up with it tough, it's a fact of life today. I think that's a very negative response, because that would actually reinforce their hostility. If you say, well, we can solve this, and it won't be a problem, how do you feel then? Then you get onto your hooliganism and the litter and the noise and the general nuisance, which I think is a much more difficult problem, because football crowds are seen differently to football crowds of 30, 40 years ago. Now we've talked about, is this the side of life today wherever you go? Is it because we haven't had a war? is football taking the rap for what is a social phenomenon. And I would agree that there's some truth in all of those points. But on the other hand, it is something which people see as associated with football. Football is something that will bring it to this area on this Saturday afternoon. And they're saying, well, we don't want it. And so...
Could bring it. Could bring it. Not would bring it.
No, but that's
a lot different.
Well, you're quite right. You're quite right to pull me up on that. But what they're saying is we won't have Arsenal supporters and Liverpool supporters unless we have Charlton football team here. So they're saying, no, we don't think we want it. Now, this is something, again, which I think has got to be a question of the football, the management, the police, the council. People have got to work together and to actually say, well, we can make it safe for you. We can make sure that you're protected. More police on the beat, not just police in the grounds. We've got to look at the surrounding areas, escorting people back. And I think there has been a tradition of this over the years, actually. People being almost frog marched back to the station and put on, and maybe that's how it has to be. But again, I think the way around it is for people to say, how can we solve it? And one of the problems I felt at the public meeting was that the football management were not prepared to participate in the discussion. I agree with you that they can't take responsibility for every single incident and pay for it because they would be financially bankrupt. But then the alternative is the local people are bearing the brunt of that, and they're saying, well, on that basis, we don't want it.
Yeah, but you're taking an isolated case. Again, I go back to the nightclub example. I mean, do you then go around, if you apply it to a football club, do you then go around and apply it to everyone else as well, who run premises where the public congregates?
I don't have letters from people who live near a particular nightclub or a particular source of entertainment to say that this is a regular problem. There certainly are problems with violence.
I know you're because it's just a stretch to Deptford, but you ask the people who live around about Champs or Cheeks, whatever it's called, Deptford Broadway.
You mentioned...
But there aren't very many residential areas immediately on top of it, are there?
Well, there's an estate just around the corner.
You mentioned litter. It just doesn't apply to football.
No, it's there.
They come down from Elton in their cars with their cans of these polystyrene tubs and they get to the crossroads near my house, the door's open, out they go on the road and they drive off.
Yeah.
And I'm nowhere near a football ground, so you can't just sort of say litter is associated with football. Litter's associated with life and everything.
Associated with people, crowds, wherever people go, there's litter.
That could be got over. I mean, if they, I wouldn't mind getting in a group, team of people and sweeping up after a game. I was given the street in a couple of votes.
And you would find enough supporters to
I don't think that would be a problem, to be honest.
Well, you see, I think that's a very helpful and a very constructive suggestion.
I think some of us would be pleased.
If you said to the people, OK, there's going to be some developments in these areas, there'll be somebody come down afterwards and we'll sweep up. I mean, theoretically the council are meant to do it, but they don't always. If someone said, right, the crowds will go and we'll follow them down, we'll have big bags and we'll get rid of all the debris.
You want one bloke, one street, you want a dozen people, you sweep 12 streets. You know where they know Canterbury, when Kent play, over the Tannoy, they say that any child wants to come and earn some money with a plastic bag and go around picking up a litter afterwards. Make kids pick it up. They may only get a few coppers, but it's an incentive.
Could I?
I think that's very constructive.
On this point, did you go to the Valley in April when they had the big clean-up and all the 2,000 people turned up?
I was in the vicinity. I was in the big tower. I was actually doing my survey on that day, and I was on Lansdowne Lane, and I watched it. I watched it, yes.
And what were your feelings then when you saw that?
Well, I mean, it was a very emotive moment. People clearly felt very strongly about it, as I said earlier, I come from a family that support football, and I know if people in Nottingham were talking about moving Forest off its ground.
They have a perfect setup, Nottingham Forest, have none of it.
I don't think they've got a perfect setup. I don't think anybody. I would say that there are good and bad, and I would say that Forest is one of the better ones, and I think probably Charlton is one of the better ones. Certainly, one of the ones that I have an adverse view of is Arsenal. I remember when Graham, my husband, took my oldest son to his first football match when he was five or six, and he's 16 now, so we're going back 10 years. Graham was horrified at the lack of facilities for children and at the violence and the appalling behaviour, which you wouldn't get on Forest Ground because Clough would be out.
But do you feel, I mean, you're talking about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the problem was still in its infancy,
yeah.
Or it had evolved from the mid to late 60s when the problem began to evolve, and you had the hordes charging across the pitch, waving their basic roller scarves and their big baggy trousers or whatever else they were wearing, as well as their football colours. The problem is, the problem has changed.
Yeah, I agree
mean,
with
it doesn't
that.
exist in that form anymore. It just does not happen. I mean, you get the odd, very, very rare occurrence, as happened at the Chelsea-Middlesbrough game at the end of 2 seasons ago.
The point I would make, though, is that some clubs have made much more effort than others to keep it as a family game and to have family enclosures, to have places where they're sure that children can see and where if people want to go with women and children.
They've got junior sections,
some
junior
move
membership
faster than others
sections.
in that.
Also, Charlton's got the opportunity to put all these things into, there'd be probably the most modern stadium in the country. They can put it. Eh?
I don't know why
They will be, because
I don't know why Ipswich is most probably different from most other places, but I don't know anywhere it's been there. But behind the back goal at Ipswich, they have a huge market place. And on Saturday, anybody that comes in by car with their flag showing are directed straight into this huge great car park market. And they're not allowed to come out of it, even to go into town. They are then directed straight into the back of the stand, where the door is already paid, and that's where they are to the whole of the match. When the match finishes, the police just surround the entrance of there, and they go straight out, get in their cars, and straight off and home. You're not allowed to walk in the town at
this
all.
is
There's a question which
that problem
Yeah, but then
will come
you're
out.
dealing with a provincial town there, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're not
But-
spending some of the size of
There's
London.
a question which comes up from the survey, the questionnaire. One question which is missing from there, which I think probably would have been a very important question. How long have you lived in the area? How long have you lived here? And I don't know, but I imagine that you would have found the majority of people who were opposed, out and out opposed to Charlton's return, would have been people who have moved there since 1985.
No, that wasn't the case.
Wasn't the case. How do you know that wasn't the case?
Because
No question.
I went in person and I picked them up and I talked to them, you see, and people would be saying, well, people would tell me, well, they remembered what it was like, and some were saying I remembered what it was like, and I'd still like them to come back, and others were saying I remembered what it was like and I was glad they were gone. There were certainly some who'd come back, and maybe I could have sensibly asked that and added that as a question. I'm not saying it wouldn't have been a useful addition, but it was a mixture. But certainly, I'll tell you this in relation to all the shopkeepers. I also went to all the traders in the area, including the pubs, and none of them wanted to tell me. Some of them wrote me a little note, and some of them said I'll send it, and they sent me little notes. But I talked to the traders, and they, by and large, had a very similar pattern. The traders who were there when Charlton were there before didn't want them back. The traders who'd moved in since thought it would be very good for business and did want them back. But those who were there before didn't want them back because they said it was very bad for trade.
Well, that's strange. That is very strange. But they did very, very good business.
I think it also depends on the nature of their business. I mean, obviously, if they've got an antique business or they've got some very specialised business.
I would have thought the sweet shop just round the corner from Floyd Road in Church Lane would wish everybody back because his place was a gold mine on a Saturday.
It was, this is the one I'm referring to.
Well, there were certainly some, but there were many who said they would close on a Saturday, and there were others. I mean, it depends on your line of business. If you're a hairdresser, for example, nobody comes to have the hair done when Charlton are playing at home, so you write that Saturday off because people can't arrive.
I don't know the time it takes their hair to do. They get there at 12 o'clock, they don't come out till 4, do they? So they haven't got a problem.
No, not at all. No problem there.
Well, I know that you could play extra time when my wife goes to the hairdressers because she said, I'll phone you when I'm ready, and I look at the clock and I thought to myself, well, I don't know, the crowd must have been dispersed by now if you were at a football match.
Well, we've got 25 minutes left. We'd also like to. No, I don't think so. Just to finish off getting the ballot, we'd also like to talk a bit about the football membership scheme.
Right.
Where do you stand? What side of the fence
Well,
do you stand
I voted
on?
against it consistently. I felt that there was some reluctance on the part of the clubs to take their full responsibility and play a full part over the years in tackling some of the problems that have surrounded football. I felt that they should have come forward and joined in the effort more wholeheartedly. And I felt that it's very easy to knock every suggestion and that perhaps something should be done. But I didn't, on balance, feel that the scheme that was being put forward was going to solve the problem. I felt, particularly after Hillsborough, in fact, that you could make a very strong argument for making the problem a great deal worse by having the card scheme.
Yeah, but just want to, no, not the moment, before we start talking about that,
Sorry.
I wanted to say, which side of the fence do you stand on when it comes to Charlton's return to the Valley?
Oh, sorry.
I thought you were onto
that bit. Well, I think I would support Charlton's return to the Valley, providing the proper arrangements are made for parking in the vicinity and for making sure that people do have access to and from their homes, and that there is some degree of cooperation between the club, the police, the local community and the council to make sure that people's lives are not made intolerable. And I would like to see that commitment. I must say I was a bit dismayed to hear the club's view that I felt was a bit too much of it's not really our problem what happens out there. I'd like them to take a step forward. I agree with you that they can't pick up the bill for everything. But I do think some of the suggestions that have come forward, had they said, well, we could organise teams to go and clean the roads afterwards, or we could organise people to make sure that there are trusted supporters standing on street corners just watching out for fans that might go marauding and causing trouble. Just to hear them making that sort of a commitment to acknowledging that it is a problem and that it's making people's lives miserable and saying we'll try and do something about it, I think would be a very welcome step.
Just to finish off, I mean, have you been to Selhurst Park since Charlton?
No, I haven't.
Been there? It might do you well to go there, stand outside for an hour and a half as the crowds are gathering, and stand outside again when they leave at the end of the match and watch.
Yes.
Because a lot of grounds you go to, the visiting supporters will be held back until all the home supporters have been released, or sometimes it's the other way around. At Selhurst Park, that never seems to happen. So you have the visiting supporters and the home supporters all let out at the same time. With the entrance I come out of, I walk up a hill along the length of the ground. Visiting supporters are all coming down the other way.
Yeah.
Never seen that.
What's the size of the crowd?
Well, it could be.
How has it dropped from the Valley to Selhurst?
Well, this season we've had several crowds that have been approaching 20,000. There have been several crowds, and when you've had even Chelsea, when they were down for an evening kick-off, there was something like 17,900 or something like that. And they were all let out at the same time. Chelsea been swapped 3-0, and there wasn't any trouble as far as I was aware.
I don't think trouble. I mean, we've had nearly 1,000 years between us, and I don't think one of us can ever say that we've ever seen a punch up with Cheltenham.
But go to Selhurst Park, look at the crowd gathering, look at the crowd dispersing, see how it works.
Would you like a cup of tea?
It's closed, I think. Well, we could possibly get one in. Well, we've only got 20 minutes, you see, until
Yes, please. Thank you. Right, sorry. Yes, I mean, I feel that particularly, my preferred option would have been for it to go down on the peninsula with a new purpose-built ground with adequate facilities for parking. If that's no longer an option, and I actually think that's still wide open because there isn't a brick laid there yet, although there are lots of discussions about that. But if that's not an option, I don't think Charlton should be lost to the borough of Greenwich, and if that means, if its only way of being attached to the borough is being in Charlton, then providing they can tackle the problems properly to make life tolerable for the people in the immediate area, then I would support it.
I think but that's going to take a long time, that peninsula one. That's the thing we want to avoid.
This might take longer.
Well, it should not.
One other aspect of this. There are going to be a number of houses built on part of the valley. Well, surely this borough is in need of housing more than most.
Well, it certainly is in need of housing. There's no dispute about that.
I don't know whether they're private houses or council.
Some housing association, isn't there?
Details of the.
But that's the question mark is over the planning commission at the moment, and the council is giving it more thought than they seemed as though they were going to in the first place.
Taking the feet, isn't that right?
Is that the date you've heard of? The 26th of January, I think, isn't it?
That's the
planning commission.
The planning committee says
that is the situation.
Right, but that was
Well, Archie
Since
won't
the
have
first-
one, George won't have one.
Last February, wasn't it, they decided to go back to the Valley when they had the meeting, and it was supposed to be that we were going back to the Valley early
March.
1990.
March.
But that's going to be not on there, is it?
It's not on.
No. See, and all that time, we have the inconvenience, Charlton supporters, going right over to Sellers Park and back again, and that's one of the worst journeys.
Yeah, right, well, we've covered that. Just to finish off on the Valley saga,
Yeah.
I think Ron...
Just assuming that we'll assume that they do get planning permission, is there any way that it could be thwarted by perhaps yourself with your residents and your political people? I mean, if they got planning permission, I mean, is there any other obstacle that could stop Charlton?
No. First of all, it isn't a political decision. The only thing that could happen is if there was government regulations that said, for example, you can only play in all-seater grounds if you're in a first division club, and that would put a certain amount of responsibility on them to make it all-seater. The government will certainly consider legislation following the Hillsborough disaster inquiry when that's reported.
That is on the cards,
I think
though,
that is the
Charlton.
intention.
That is the intention.
Their intention is in the long run to make it all
Not all
seater,
that long.
but not immediately. But I don't
No,
actually
it's a
think.
problem at
But I
all.
don't think it would be critical for Charlton,
No,
as you
no.
say. I think they could
Their crowds.
cater with the amount of crowds they're likely to
What
get
they've
on
got
an
already.
all-seater basis.
Yeah.
So I don't think that would be a problem. But that's really the only thing. I mean, if the thing that you have to remember is they don't need any permission from anybody to go and play football there. They've already got that permission, as long as they comply with the safety regulations.
Yes.
One of the reasons they were closed initially, apart from the financial things, of course, were the safety regulations. You remember the GLC clamped down on them following the big fire at Bradford, and they were considered to be a fire risk, and that was, anybody could say that they're not safe if they weren't complying with the safety regulations. But if they got planning permission for this new development, which is only a sort of one removed planning permission in that it will make the money available for the club to do what they want to renovate the ground. But if it weren't dependent on that, they could go back tomorrow. And if they get that planning permission...
There shouldn't be a major problem.
No, the only thing that could happen is if you got government legislation that said you've got to have roads wider than so-and-so, or you've got to have more than 4 roads, or...
But that will apply everywhere,
That's
wouldn't
it.
it?
Close out.
That will apply everywhere.
Well, it would.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
A lot of the inner city grounds. But you see,
Tottenham and that.
but what you have to remember is the government, and it would be any government, not just this government, the government can't afford another Hillsborough disaster, which, depending on loopholes which they could have closed. They must.
Right, which brings us quite comfortably.
Brings
us quite comfortably onto the membership bill. Right, okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make
All right,
one
sorry.
point first before you go on. I've followed football for about 70 years, I suppose. And I've always stood, I've never wanted to go in the stand. So what right has anybody got to stop me from standing at a football match?
Well, I agree with you that there is a matter of civil liberty involved in this, and if you want to stand, you've certainly got a right to stand. But if it's agreed that standing crowds, are responsible in some way for lack of safety provision, and they do say they must be all-seater stands, or unless they say that standing areas must be restricted to no more than such a density. I mean, I don't think it's the fact that people stand. I think it's the fact that they've been packed in like sardines. So if they could...
Fenced in.
Well, I agree with you that people have enjoyed it. It's been part of the community feel of it. But there have been over the years a number of safety regulations that have actually gone against people's civil liberties in the interests of the safety.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you were, looking at those bodies that were brought out after Hillsborough, they didn't enjoy it much, did they? I mean, it's a question of, you've got to protect crowds. Crowds do tend to behave in a certain way. They surge forward together, and I think there do have to be elements of protection, and there are a lot of things that people are not allowed to do, which you could argue by definition are their civil right to do. I mean, to stand on this ground rather than to sit there. I can see how people do want to stand in these circumstances.
The regulations really that caused that disaster by having the fences, which we don't normally have. It may
They
have
haven't
stopped
been
a few.
removed, have they? They haven't.
No, but it may have stopped a few from getting onto the pitch, what they're designed for. But in the aftermath, it caused all those deaths because they couldn't get onto the pitch.
Spread out to the sides.
You see, it was a
Well, it's a
regulation
bit
that went against
it is the case, you see, that it is the case that in their desire to curb the hooligans, they've jeopardised the safety of the majority who are not hooligans.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
It's the minority view that's being taken in consideration.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you didn't curtail the hooligans and you let them go onto the pitch, you were ruining the match all the time. But I agree with you. My view is that safety must be the number one consideration.
Yeah, but I mean, if you go anywhere and you sit down, it's got to be less safe to get up out of a seat where you've got to push past something than standing.
And you can't get over the seats.
It's not a safety aspect, is it? It's something that somebody's thought of and they said, oh, that's a good idea. But it can't be safer to sit than it is to stand, not for getting out in.
We were saying
the only way it could be safe because the crowds are less densely packed. But if there'd been seating at Leppings Lane at Hillsborough, and that same surge had come through, there would have been people tumbling over seats, getting trampled down in between the seats, and the death would probably have been higher.
Yeah, I mean, the crowd I've mentioned already, 75,000 in at Charlton, and I don't think that anybody who were all there at that match, and it's not that long ago, it's only about 50
years ago.
And at that time, there was no trouble whatsoever. There's nothing ever reported. You look at the Kentish Mercury, it's in the Woodlands, gallery there. You can have a look at that. And it would state that there's not one case of trouble caused there.
Well, I don't think there's any dispute that there's been a dramatic change.
Well,
you want to talk about the bill?
Yeah, we've got precisely 14 minutes, so I'd like to hear a little bit about it.
Well, my view is that I voted against it. I did feel that something had to be done to control the football violence, the minority that were spoiling it for the majority. And I did feel that some of the clubs had dragged their heels in not taking their share of the responsibility. And I was saying to you earlier, and you quite rightly pulled me up and said something that it was 10 years ago, but my husband, who doesn't take pen to paper very often, he did write to Arsenal and said that as a football supporter with a young son who he was just starting to bring to football, he was disgusted at the lack of provision for families and children and the fact that he didn't feel his child was safe and blah blah blah, and he got the rudest letter back from Arsenal, basically telling him to get stuffed in. And in fact I wished I'd saved it because I would have read it out during this debate, but I was very angry about that at the time because he wrote as a football supporter saying he wanted to continue bringing his children to football. And in fact I asked him the other day, because our youngest son is now 4, and I said, when are you going to take him? And he said, not yet, he's not quite old enough yet. But I do feel that maybe they've started to move now, but they've been reluctant to take their own share of responsibility. I don't blame them for the football violence. I don't think that it's their fault, but as it's happened, I think they've got to join with the other representatives of society to try and contain the problem.
We've all got to.
We've all got to take our share of the responsibility. And it's no good the clubs saying, well, it's a feature of society, it's because there haven't been a war, nothing to do with us. It may be a feature of society, but we've all got to work towards solving it. And I do think some of them have dragged their heels in putting their own house in order. But I don't feel that this bill is the answer. I can see the arguing behind it so that you can exclude known troublemakers. But my view is that it won't actually work like that. That the police themselves have said that if you've got a crush, the safest thing is to let them in rather than try and keep them out. The sort of people we're talking about will be the first to get cards from other sources and what have you. The people who will be penalised yet again will be the many perfectly innocent football supporters. I voted against the bill, as I said, but there were various sub-clauses that we put forward to try and get women excluded. I mean, women, and there are no women, pensioners, disabled. But why should you be penalised in that sense by not being included? But in the you see, I feel that in their attempt to get the small minority of troublemakers, the vast majority of perfectly law-abiding football supporters are going to be inconvenienced. I mean, I toyed with it because I felt something should be done. I mean, I don't like any more than anybody else does switching on the television and seeing our football supporters running riot. I mean, my husband was telling me that the last time he went abroad to see Forest play abroad, it was in Holland, and he said he was ashamed by the supporters out there.
Well, there's an easy way
People
around
get
that.
bored.
They can
That's-
confiscate.
Well,
That's
part
right.
2 of the bill, I don't think anyone is
Nobody
in
disputes that.
disagreement with it.
Nobody disputes that. But he said to me, he doesn't go as often as he used to, and he said, and if I had to have a pass, then the tendency would be for people like me to think, oh, I'd like to go to a football match this afternoon. I haven't got a pass, so I won't go.
Go. That's it.
Yeah, and what happens to the father and son, as happened in your family, where the father supports Forest and the son supports Wolves,
That's right.
and Forest are playing Wolves?
And you
What do
see-
they do?
Yeah, and my husband is a Forest supporter, but because he now lives in
They both
London,
not go. They play
last
Saturday.
weekend he went to see Southampton playing whoever they were playing in London. Because,
He's a Millwall supporter.
well, you see, he's the sort that if he'd got a free Saturday afternoon and he'd like to watch a football match, because his team are at Nottingham and they play along, he'd look what was on and he'd say, right, I'll go and watch that. Well, if he'd got to have a pass, he wouldn't go.
Yeah.
So they would lose all those
So
sorts
the neutral
of supporters.
supporters. run
Yeah.
Yes, good Vikings and
Well, you should know about floating voters, shouldn't you?
What about, for example, the other end, so going away from the terraces to say the executive boxes? Now, that has become a major source of income for a lot of football clubs these days, and all the business has been done in executive boxes. What are they going to do for the people for the company that's hired out, leased out the box? Can they not take guests there? Will they get a day membership? What is the point of having a day membership?
Yeah.
What checks will be run?
Well, I accept all that. I mean, I think these are all the limitations of it. And my particular reason, the thing that's convinced me absolutely that it was wrong was looking at what happened at Hillsborough.
yes,
and,
that is my one.
and also, I felt that whatever else, it should be put on ice until we had the
Yeah.
full report from
Yes,
Hillsborough.
yes.
And they decided whether this scheme was going to be helpful or possibly make a situation that was already a bit volatile even more dangerous. And I felt their case wasn't proved at all.
No, but they say this every time, don't everything happens, it won't happen again. It happened at Rangers at Ibrox Park where there was hundreds of people killed. It happened at Bradford. It happened. It won't be the last time. It won't be the last time a ferry sinks. They don't really do the right thing about it, do they? They pester and part about
It is.
and the minority
No,
don't.
but I agree with what you say. You can't stop disasters, but you must do everything within your power to make safety
If it's not
regulations
done in
such.
the correct
But the
order.
reason I didn't agree with this was I wasn't convinced it was the right solution.
I agree with you. It isn't the right thing. They always go to
through
the
life that it's the minority that spoils it always for the majority.
Tail wags the dog.
It always is,
Everything
isn't it?
you talk about in life is always the one or two that ruin everything.
Yeah.
It happened at school when you read.
You know, we all remember it's the one or two that caused trouble, and they said, right, we cancel the outing next
Yes,
Wednesday.
the whole class was kept in because some silly
Well,
kid-
that's the
Well, we're not, and we all agree on that. Do you know what the latest news is on how the scheme will be implemented? They've been talking about a pilot scheme, haven't they? Chelsea have been talking about Luton have volunteered, but I mean that's
right.
silly.
But they've already got one, so
Well, it doesn't work anyway.
Doesn't
I mean,
work.
every time an away goal at school, you get a cheer
No.
up.
I'm just wondering what would happen, you know, if it goes through, and these matches, we've already discussed this, of these crowds, they get impatient of getting in, and they won't be able to get in so easy, and it's going to be Hillsborough again, in many cases.
Yes.
It
There
could
has
be.
been-
Computers go
can I
down,
just-
what happens?
Can I just ask you, I agree that's a major problem, what does happen? But something that's been being debated is changing the ruling on no drinking grounds. Because they said one of the reasons that people come in at the 11th hour is because they're all drinking in pubs, not immediately on top of the ground, because the ones on top may be closed. And so they all surge in at the 11th hour, and it has been suggested that they open the bars so that they can come into the club and drink. I mean, if you want people to get there an hour earlier, what do they do? But I would...
No.
For my personal feeling, I must admit I virtue a teetotaler anyway.
Yeah.
Right? I would do away with anything other than just cup of tea and coffee at football grounds tomorrow.
Personally, I don't
Because you've got to take a step somewhere along.
I do drink, and I would bet.
I think,
Well, I don't
it
like
doesn't.
before
I
a
don't
match because the toilet facilities
I've
generally so poor.
Yeah.
Gone in there
I
after
don't
us
see
and
the
all that
need
for
for
it,
it. You can't do
but I would say,
away with the need
Cut it out
before a
again.
game.
People wanted the original.
Well, there's something wrong up there.
yeah, I was
I
right.
agree with
I mean,
you.
it's social. I mean,
I
we
do.
enjoy it. Tonight I should play darts. I should have half a shandy. More than that.
Saturday
But
night,
you see, the argument is, I mean, I don't accept the argument. I agree with you. I think it's giving in to the wrong
Yeah,
forces.
exactly. Yeah.
But they're saying that the reason you're getting these last-minute rushes, like you got at Hillsborough, is they all hang on in the pub until 5 minutes
One
left.
of the reasons
was that a lot of the coaches were delayed by
Yes.
roadworks.
roadwork. There's many
that's
things.
another-
We've been
And
delayed many a
alcohol was banned on
time. You go to a match, but not through drinking.
But if you do, but there has been suggestion that they should allow drinking in clubs as a result of the Hillsborough thing. Stop people drinking.
Well, personally, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, I don't really see
You can drink even now at Man United. When you queue up at Man United, you can go in and drink inside the ground because they've got a licence, and the licence says that you can't drink in sight of the pitch, but as long as you're standing in the enclosed area between the turnstiles and the terraces, you can drink. It really makes no difference at all.
But you can always go to the club. You know, even at Sellers Park,
even
you
if
can
there's
go to the
two
club.
clubs where you can go and get a
Yeah, it
drink.
doesn't
You have to be a
make any
member.
difference.
No, I say you can.
If
So
you,
you
if
can
you want to
get.
get drunk, still get gross slow. Yeah, Sainsbury's Friday night and drink it all Saturday morning before you go.
Of course you can.
They're drunken to do that.
I don't know who makes these comments, and people
No,
listen
they're
to them.
not.
There's probably one newspaper reporter, never been to a football match in
They're
his
not
life,
really
what's in the
founded.
paper, and they'll say that's
They're
what
not really
they don't ask
foundation
people
for
like
this.
us, do they? That's
I mean,
the people they've got to
I
ask.
mean, you've been to football matches all your life. I mean, for over 50 years in all these cases. We do know something that goes on.
Because you said you spoke to a policeman who used to police at the Valley years ago, and he said there used to be two of them on duty or something. Well, I've also spoken to a policeman who used to police the Valley in the 30s, 40s and 50s. And what I've heard, well, all they really ever had to do was to pick up the occasional drunk, which has collapsed on the floor.
Which you'll always get.
Which you'll always get.
Get at the ferry, don't you?
Yes.
Go on the ferries.
Yeah, but we've often
Stop the first.
Well, I mean, those sort of drunks are not the violent ones. I mean, it is it's the tendency that the association of the drinking and the violence.
Well, drinking
Well,
will make anyone violent.
Yeah, it's
different
indeed
effects.
significant.
It can,
Yeah,
depending
it
on the
can.
circumstances,
Yeah.
make
It
anyone
depends
violent.
on the individual,
I've seen
whether
it.
he can take. But we've spoken here about the large crowds in pre-war days and the crowds of today, which are so much smaller. I think the main difference is the money that the man has in his pocket. The man never had a lot of money in his pocket in the 30s and 40s to go spending on anything other than his 1 and 6 to get in the ground.
It's very expensive to go to a football match.
Oh, yeah,
I
it
still
is.
haven't got any money in my pocket. Cost me 15 quid every time I go. And I'm retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to be dictated to, I've got to buy a car, I've got to have an identification card. 15 quid it cost
It
me.
used to be pence, really, didn't
It
it?
used to cost me shilling, and one of us out of about perhaps 6 people would buy a penny programme, which would just have the name of the team on, nothing else like, you know. But about 6 of us shared that programme for a penny, and a pound, shilling to go in.
Yeah,
You
that's
charge
right.
the exchequer.
So what's your many of you nodded that you didn't feel that the clubs had done enough to put their own house in order. Is there any other constructive suggestion to help tackle this problem,
Yeah, I think
which we all agree is a
stewards.
minority?
I think that they could get enough stewards within a football club to do 75. You've got to have the police that they could do 75% of what the police do if they've got the right sort of uniform and the garb and identification.
Yeah.
The clubs never put in the programme, are people willing to put their name down for sweeping up whatever, or whatever.
And would people respond better then? Because yesterday I saw my first guardian angels in the tube. I'd never seen them before down the tube.
But I mean,
Three
if
of
they
them.
didn't get
The comments they were getting as people were walking past saying, "Oh, well done, nice to see you."
Yeah.
You don't get that when people see the police.
No, the police are against you.
There's one
I
other
think it could be done on that sort of
respond
basis. If
better.
they didn't get the response, well then you could say to the club, well, but I mean, I would quite willingly, I know people I know, friends of mine that would be quite willing to go every Saturday or do it in it.
And the club give them a free ticket.
But this-
Whatever.
for a handful of
It-
people.
it-
it could be funded by the government from this money they're wasting on this.
Well, the club's got to play the police.
Yeah, I
It'd
know.
be cheaper to play it.
Well, this is
But the money the government are going to waste on this bit of plastic to get into the ground, why don't they distribute that round and take some money from the pools and distribute it round to pay for these people to steward ground?
I think it would be an idea if those professional stewards, or probably people like us or our sons. Or I think it could be done. I think it's a good idea.
That's the vital difference between us doing it and the police, isn't it? The police have got authority, whereas...
Yeah, we all react in different ways to authority.
Marshalling crowds would be, marshalling crowds and perhaps, letting say the cars you can't park there, having them there. I mean,
the reaction with respect to another bloke, you said that to him, you're still getting...
Oh, yeah. Well, true.
I'm only saying this is sort of proper you're in the face.
Well, did you read that bit in the programme? All the things what will happen now, to have you rejected from the ground, this, that and everything else, in the programme. There's a whole page of it. Oh, yes, you want to read
Swearing
that.
or abuse
Well,
of
if that's the case, once you're on private property, which the valley would be, then people that are appointed by the clubs, i.e. Ron, Archie or anybody, have the power to eject those people from the ground without the police intervening.
Well, I mean, you'd have police anyway, which is a backup. I mean, you wouldn't basically do anything.
You're on private land.
You've got to get about 6 or 7 all gang up and
it needs to be very carefully thought through and the training.
But I think that how it exactly works out is something that needs to be gone into more carefully. But a general commitment on the part of the clubs, the sort of thing you're talking about, to say, well, we'll work with the local community to make sure it's not a disaster. I think that sort of a response would make them feel much more comfortable, because it's not a them and us situation. It's let's all get on the same side.
But one of the, I've said this before, that if a person is taken out of the crowd for unruly behaviour, it's taken by the police, he should be made sure that he doesn't come to another football match for a number of weeks, where he's taken to a police station every Saturday.
Well, he's only got to report to a place.
Report
to a place where he does community work for that afternoon.
That's what I'm saying. That's what it should be.
The trouble is, I've spoken to probation officers about this, and they don't want these. They don't want football hooligans on a Saturday afternoon.
Well, there won't be a footballer if they've got no football. They can't do it.
They feel that their view is that community service has got to be handled carefully, and to be done properly, it's got to be well.
The community service and report to the police station.
I agree with you. To keep them away from the match.
It's a sentence. Not give them 28 days hard labour or something, but report on every Saturday.
That's a far heavier punishment than doing community service.
Much more severe punishment, and it's not. It enables them to work still. If they work, it wouldn't stop them.
Destroy their life.
It would upset them, and that's about the best solution of the lot, as far as I could see anyway.
They're going to have part 2 of the bill says
They just don't go to a football match.
I'm going to have to go.
I'd like to say thank you to Rosie for coming.
I'll make sure I come to Rectory Field Crescent. I've got a few roads I haven't done. I've got a list of the ones I've done. Hicking Close, Gallen Close, Barney Close, Eastcombe Avenue, Floyd Road, Harvey Gardens, Valley Grove, Sam Barton Close, Delafield Road, Sundawn Road, Swallowfield Road, Wellington Gardens, Nadine Street, Gallogly Terrace, never pronounced that one, Elliscombe Avenue, Inverine Road, Hound Park Road, Wolf Crescent, Lansdowne Lane, Charlton Church Lane, The Heights, Charlton Lane, Victoria Way. That's what I've done so far. And so any that aren't on there, I'll be getting round to the ones that are in that.
Can I just say a word?
Yeah.
I will.
Okay.
Well, next week, on a Tuesday, we are here to launch our book. And I only think that through our treasurer and our secretary, that you should be sent one.
Thank you very much. I'd be delighted. That would be lovely. I'd be very honoured.
We won't charge you,
Well, I'd be most pleased. That would be very nice. Thank you all very much.
So you see Colin Moyne, I'm asking when he's going to clean up Henley. A friend of mine went to a sponsor's tent at Henley, as you know, it was from the sponsors from the company that took him there, and he said he's never seen so much hooliganism in his life. They was knocking people. No, seriously, they were knocking people over in the tent.
Well, you see, you get it on the stations, don't you? The yuppies on, Liverpool Street.
You get it everywhere.
Yeah.
You get it in the Houses of Parliament.
It's not really...
You do. I often feel like saying to them, who are you to be talking about discipline in schools?
That's the way you lot behave in here.
When we go to the valley as their guests, you can be one of them who can come with us.
Really?
Right.
We're all going to get kitted out.
Oh, good. I might draw the line at the shorts.
Thanks for your time.
Cheerio. That's another subject. We haven't heard on to that.
Oh, wow.
You lost it.